Hey everybody, welcome to the third installment of Cleaning Code with Doc Norton. Again, in this episode, we're working with the JDepend library. You can follow along on GitHub by going to doc.on/dev JDepend, and you can get the original source, of course, over on GitHub Clarkware's JDepend. Now, in the first couple of episodes, we took a look at File Manager and did a little bit of refactoring in here. And then we actually started to pull some responsibility out into ClassContainer. And we did most of that work in episode 2 and went back and began to apply ClassContainer to our File Manager. But I want to finish that up. There's a step that I think we really kind of missed that will allow us to get rid of the directories altogether and just have a collection of an array list of class containers. And then we're going to take a look at how this gets called. And it turns out that when we look at extract files and collect files and start to trace through that, there's a number of decisions that are being made around whether or not what we're looking at is a directory or if it's a war or jar file, etc. And I believe that all of that responsibility is actually going to fit very nicely into ClassContainer. But first, we're going to need to split ClassContainer into two different specific types of class containers. So we're going to go through those refactorings today. All right, to start with, here we are in File Manager. And like I said, we want to get rid of this directories altogether. And I really think we could have done that at the end of episode 2. But the episode was getting a little long, and I like to keep these around 30 minutes if at all possible. So we're going to go ahead and finish that up today. So let's see here. The way we're going to do that is I actually want to get a little bit smarter about this. So we're going to make a collection of class containers rather than a collection of files. So it's introduced a new array list. This is of class container, and we'll call it, what do you think? Class containers. Equals new array list. Okay. So we now have that. That shouldn't do anything in terms of our tests, but let's run the suite anyway. Great, everything passes as we expected. Okay, so let's go down here. Right now what we're doing is we're adding to directories a new class container file name, get file, right? So let's just add into this that we're also going to add it there into our class containers. Let's run the tests. Everything should still pass. Great. Let's go ahead and pull that out quick. Let's do it here because it's going to be easier for us. Place both. Class container. Great. Okay, so we've done that. We should still be good as far as the tests go. And then the next thing that we actually want to do is down here, where we're iterating through our directories and then doing a collect, etc. We're going to make a change to this, where instead of a file from the directory, from our directories, we are actually going to go ahead and get a class container from our class containers And then we'll call collect files differently. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this in one swoop. We'll call it container. That's fine. From class containers, this should be container. And then this just needs to be container.get file. Okay. So now we are no longer using the directories, which means that as soon as these tests all pass, which they will, we can go back up and we can actually eliminate directories altogether. And one more time to prove it works. And we have eliminated that concept, basically getting ourselves ready for what I believe to be the next steps here. All right, so let's actually, let's commit that change. Let's see here, right? And then we'll move on to the next piece. So I'm going to get, just so that you're, for those of you that are paying attention, GI for me is a shortcut for git commit, -am, all right. And this is eliminate directories from file manager. Git status, we're good. Git log, we're good. Okay, so back in here, let's take a look at what's next for us. So we talked about, once we got file manager cleaned up a little bit, was actually looking at how it's being used. So the extract files and collect files, if we move through this, we notice, first of all, we're just going through the files that we've collected together. Collect files first checks to see if it's actually a file. If it is, it adds it to a list of files in a kind of funky way, as far as I'm concerned. If it's not a file, then it decides that it's a directory. It iterates through the directory and finds files inside of there and adds those to our files list. And if that is a directory, it actually recursively calls collect files. So basically, if we think about what we've got here, we have a list of containers, class containers, which are directories, jars, wars, and zips. This thing iterates through them once, and if it's a jar, a war, or a zip, it just adds it to our file list. If, on the other hand, it's a directory, it traverses that directory structure looking for other files and adds them to our file list. That seems interesting. So if we actually look at where does extract files get called, it only gets called in our test and in Java Class Builder. So let's see what Java Class Builder does. Java Class Builder says, hey, file manager, go extract files for me, and then try to add all of the classes that come back from build classes, for a particular file. So what does build classes do? It takes a file, and the first thing it does is it says, hey, if this is a valid file name, which maybe ends in class or has a $sign in it, depending on if we allow inner classes or not, then parse the class and add the results of that to our list of Java classes, right? Otherwise, if it's a valid container, remember, that is a jar, a war, or a zip, then create a jar file, call build classes jar file, which is a different method, which basically, if we look at this, iterates through the contents of that file and starts to pull out class files from it and adds them to this whole list. And so we're looking at the contents of our now array list of class containers, and we're actually iterating through it a couple of times, and we have a bunch of conditionals around, is this a file or is it a directory? And then we have secondarily, when it's actually a class file, is it one that we accept or not? I think this is relatively convoluted, and I believe that if we make ClassContainer more intelligent, basically pushing some of this responsibility into ClassContainer, we can get rid of a lot of the conditionals and kind of double looping and weird stuff that's going on in both File Manager and Java Class Builder. But like I mentioned in the intro, in order to do that, we're going to need to actually create two different types of class container. There's going to be one that is for directories and one that is for archive files, jar or zip. And in order to do that, we need to introduce an abstract class. So we are going to begin the next phase here by introducing that abstract class. Okay, we're going to take ClassContainer here, and we're going to go ahead and introduce that base class. The way that I'm going to do it is I'm actually just going to say that ClassContainer extends the base class, even though that base class doesn't exist. So say ClassContainer base. So that's going to force me to create that class. Let's go ahead and create it. It's not a public class. It's actually an abstract class. Okay, go back to our ClassContainer. Right, that's good. If we just look, those actually, tests should still run. We haven't really done anything as of yet. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start pulling some stuff up. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to pull up location, because every one of our ClassContainer instances is going to have a location. It's kind of key to it. So pull members up. And let's do these one at a time just for the heck of it. So location, go ahead and refactor that. We see that we actually now call super source. So we're going to pass source to the super. The super, we're going to guess, is going to actually set the location to source. Sure enough, that's what it does. Okay, great. And then every one of these things needs to know is not a file and is not a container. So let's go ahead and pull up is not a file. It is not a file. And let's just go ahead and do it's not a container while we're sitting here. Although it's crying now. That's fine. And we will continue. Okay, so the difference is not a container. Actually, you know what? I didn't want to pull that up. What I wanted to do was leave that. Let me undo this for a second. Yep, undo it. Let's do these one at a time. That's fine. So is not a file. We'll do that one first. Refactor. Pull members up. That's fine. It's clean refactoring. Okay. Let's run our tests. We're good there. Okay, very good. Let's go back, take a look at this. Okay, what I really want to do is I want this basically to override the method in the base class. So let's try that. So by giving it the annotation, it knows I'm supposed to do that. It now made it protected, is not a container. And if you look at the ClassContainer base, it now has protected abstract Boolean is not container. So it's the contents isn't defined. But that was an easier way to do that. So let's run the tests again. Make sure that we're actually good. All right, now this is going to need some more work, clearly. But let's go ahead and actually make the commit. Where are we? Very good. Let's add all. And this is introduce base class. And we're clean. All right. So head back here and let's look at what's next. All right. The next thing I actually want to do is move this out of here as well. Is not a file is already defined in the base class, and is not container is going to be overridden in each of the specific implementations. So I'm going to pull this over here. That's going to cause that to happen. Do that, save it, get rid of that extra line, come back here. That looks good, and run the tests. And just make sure that that didn't break anything. Okay, so that's better. So you're starting to see that this is actually getting thinner and thinner. What we want to do now is we're going to introduce the directory class container as an extension of class container base, and then we'll do an archive class container as extension of class container base, and then we'll basically dismantle this class container and get rid of it altogether. All right, so to create the directory class container, we're going to actually go ahead and create a new test class, and this really is going to be kind of interesting because we're going to be pulling tests over from class container test into directory class container test. Okay, so this, of course, JDepend test case, great. That requires us to create the constructor. Okay, so let's take a look at class container test. And we'll start with this one. We'll just grab if it's a valid container, then we should have an instance. So we're going to pull it out of here because it's no longer a class container test, or it won't be. And we're going to drop it over here. Okay, now this is a directory class container instead of a class container. That does not yet exist. Let's create it. Of course, over there, and directory class container build. That's not good. We want location. Actually, we want source, right? Let's keep it consistent. And how's this going to work? Well, this is going to extend our class container base. That's going to require us to implement some methods. It is not a container. Insert the super. And we should pass source to super. Okay. All right, now that's not going to work because this is going to throw an error. Well, it won't compile, so let's add the exception to that. Okay, I'm actually going to make this return true. You'll see in a second why I'm going to do that. I'm going to run the tests, and the test should fail. And basically what we've got here is the test is saying call super. So it's basically just a constructor, right? Super says if it's not a file or is not a container, then throw an exception. So it is actually a file. So this is false, or is not a container. Well, if we had our current is not a container return false, then this test would pass. So I just wanted to do that. So now to get it to pass, I'm going to actually hard code this to false. Okay, great. So now my test passes. And so I've got a couple of options here. When I look at the class container tests, I have, oh, interesting. Here, I have invalid directory or test a file. Now, if we pass a file to the directory class container, it should error because it doesn't recognize archive files. So let's make that our next test. And right, so we're going to confirm exception. So let's do this. New test. And it is constructor, jar file, IO exception. Right, that's what we expect. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this, drop it over here, and this is actually, let's make it a valid jar file. So get test datadir test.jar. All right, confirm IO exception. I'm just going to grab that for now. The difference over here is going to be one. This should be a directory class container instead of a standard class container. That should be fine. Okay, so now what should happen is the first one passes and the second one fails because we don't get the exception at the moment. Yep, it failed. Why did it fail? Because it should raise an IO exception, but it didn't. Great. So now we can finally implement that. So rather than just hard-coded response, the way this should work is location is directory, and of course we've got a bunch of double negatives. So actually it's not is directory. Now if we run the tests, boom, we're good. Okay, and just for giggles, we've done a valid directory, we've done a jar file. Let's go ahead and grab our invalid directory from here. Got it. So now we are failing. Now we're testing all of our conditions. We are testing that it's actually a valid directory. We're testing that it's some kind of a file that's not a directory, and we are testing that it is a non-existent location. So this should come for free because the base class is the one that checks to see if it's a file or not. All right, so that is the end of our directory class container. Now let's see what is next for us. All right, now in the interest of time, I've gone ahead and done the exact same thing, driving out an archive class container. So you'll see here, just as we had with the directory class container, we just basically moved tests from class container test over. Archive class container did the same thing. And so now, if we have a missing file, right, there's an IO exception, testing archive class container. And then we basically just confirm jar file, war file, and zip file are all valid. So that moves all those tests over, and that of course drove out the behavior for archive class container, which extends the class container base. We have the constructor is not a container. Basically says is return not is container file. Is container file now, rather than checking is it a directory, actually looks to see does it have an extension of or jar or zip, and that is this method here. So we've moved this behavior into these two classes. Now, right now, we still have all of this garbage still in class container as well. We don't actually need it, except that file manager is still using class container. So we need file manager to either use archive or directory class container appropriately. But we don't want it making that decision. So what we're going to do next is we're going to build a simple factory that we will pass it a source. It will look at the source, determine if that is a directory location. If it is, it's going to return us a directory class container. If it's not, it's going to return us an archive class container. So that will be the next piece that we build here. You know what? Considering how long that's going to take us to actually test drive out the factory, implement it, completely dismantle class container, and kind of clean this stuff up, we're already at about 26 minutes. I'm going to call this done for episode 3, and in episode 4, we'll actually drive out the factory and fully implement it. So thanks for watching this series so far. This has been fun for me. It's actually been pretty educational. I'm learning kind of as I go. Hopefully you're getting some value out of it. If you like the series, please go ahead and click that thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. And I will see you in episode 4.